SSI Lead Candidate Forum. And a number of years ago we began this track, and it's been a great learning experience for all of us. These students are all campaign managers for gubernatorial candidates that are running for office, and the students within the camp tomorrow night will be going to the polls and voting for their choice between one of these four candidates and their campaigns. We actually have I-voted stickers when you come out, so you get a chance to, show the world that you voted. We have a very high voter percentage here, much higher than the regular. We're very excited about it. We have 4 candidates, 4 parties, and 4 teams representing those 4 parties. You'll notice that you should have been given a voter guide. This gives you a little bit of background and information on the candidates. We have Roderick Callahan with the Willow Party, Nicholas Hill with the Maple Party, Joel Mcdonald with the Oak Party, and Darren Thomas with the Elm Party. All trees, not too creative, but we like that. Okay. And these group of folks, they got assigned their candidate and the range of issues on Sunday night, and now they're here to do the debate, and they're going to be representing their candidate because the candidates are fictional. We just made them up. Okay, so we have a good time doing that. We have a panel of I was going to say distinguished, and I said extinguished. That too? That'll do. The distinguished media personalities. First on this side we have Zach Weston, who is from NPR. He'll be asking questions of our candidates. We have Zeke Talmadge, who's with the Lead News Network that you can check online and see all of the newspaper and broadcasts for what we do this week. And we also have Frankie Dane with the Detroit News. And our timekeeper will be Jocelyn Nelke. She's going to make sure that everybody stays on schedule. And all of those, by the way, are SSI alumni, so that's kind of cool. All right, let me introduce to you our panel representatives today. We have, starting on this side, I'm going to go right down the line. This is the Elm Party right here. Darren Thomas is their candidate. Marin Setsuda, Carly Borama, Matthew Kasanek, Faith Hawks, and Jacob Williams. You can give them a hand as a team. How about that? That's good. It's kind of like graduation. When your kid's named, everybody yells. Okay. All right. The Maple Party is next. Nicholas P. Hill is their candidate. Alexis Gillette, Heidi Rice, Leah Henneveld, Nicholas Fenn, and Joshua Adair. Let's give them a round of applause. In addition, we have the Oak Party. Next is representing Joel Mcdonald, Andrew Hubbard, Emily Ostoff, Brielle Denoyer, Levi Raymond, and Allison Rigtrink. Give them a hand. And on the far side, we have the Willow Party, who represents Roderick Callahan, candidate for governor. That's Nathan Halder, Emma Williams, Grace Smith, Grace Rainey, and Emmanuel Danig. Let's give them a hand as well. Okay, we have an order of our debate, just like is always in the case. Opening statements by each campaign will be 1 minute each. No challenges at the end of the opening statements, and then we'll take up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 of the primary issues that are in your voter guide. And once we get to the actual issues, each team is allowed a maximum of 3 challenges. You have to do at least 1, right? So we're going to make sure that everybody gets engaged in the process. Okay, so that's the way it's going to work, and we will begin now. Opening statements, and these are individuals. Carly Borama will be first, and then we'll have Joshua Adair, Emily Ostoff, and Emma Williams. Carly will be representing Darren Thomas of the Elm Party.
Thank you, Mr. Muffett. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of candidate Mr. Darren Thomas and the entire Elm Campaign Party, I am honored to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, to this debate tonight. President Kennedy once said that the ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of all. That is the reason all of you are here tonight, because informed voters are necessary for an effective democratic republic to exist. So where does Darren Thomas stand on the four main issues of tonight? Well, first, Mr. Thomas strongly opposes the death penalty and implementing it in Michigan. Secondly, Darren Thomas has developed a plan to balance the Michigan budget, supporting small businesses and reducing the income tax. Thirdly, Mr. Thomas supports arming teachers to keep the students in Michigan schools safe. And finally, Darren Thomas believes cell phone data should be available to emergency personnel in real emergencies. As you hear these statements, I want you to keep one thing in mind. Where do you stand on these issues? What candidate matches your viewpoint the most accurately? As you think about these issues tonight, we urge you to think Thomas.
Thank you very much. Joshua Adair with the Maple Party, speaking on behalf of Nicholas P. Hill.
All right, thank you, Mr. Muffet. Nicholas Hill is here to promote justice, create a safer nation, and to ensure God-given rights. Hill has a passion for serving and knows that he will make a huge and beneficial change to this state and stop the abuse that has sadly been happening to our rights. He will bring his experience as a veteran, his involvement in business, his practice as a lawyer, and his contribution to the Michigan state government and to the involvement he will have as a governor. Our candidate firmly believes in cutting state expenditures, lowering the income tax, and promoting pro-life values. Hill is a strong advocate for the freedom of arms, and he will implement a new strategy to prevent and stem the horrible tragedies that are happening at our schools. Finally, he will put more power into the hands of citizens and uphold the freedom of choice.
Thank you very much. Give me a hand for that. Next we have Emily Ostoff, who will be speaking on behalf of the Oak Party, Joel McDonald's candidacy.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. The past cannot be changed, yet the future is in your power. Joel McDonald, a graduate of Northern Michigan University and former head of the pharmaceutical program of Walgreens Incorporated, is a man just like you, passionate for helping those around him and those in his community. It was that passion that first got Joel into politics. It was working as a pharmacist in Lansing during the opioid crisis that got him engaged into the political world. After serving 6 years in the Michigan House of Representatives and now running for governor, Joel's talents and abilities are put best to use. Joel's passion for keeping our schools safe and for the protection of our family and children in emergency situations stems from the fact that his own family, his wife and twin daughters, are always the most important people in his life. McDonald's views on human life he holds with the utmost respect, and that comes through in all he stands for. He is dedicated to making our future brighter and safer than ever for the upcoming generations. That is his passion and his energy. Joel McDonald for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, opening statement from Emma Williams, Representative Roderick Callahan from the Willow Party.
Our candidate is Roderick Callahan, a man whose goal is enabling individuals. He was born in Iowa, but was drawn to Michigan when he was 20, where he started his own real estate business in Detroit with his brother. Callahan is a businessman who ran a successful business for 30 years before he entered politics. This experience has shown him the importance of small businesses and local cultural development. Callahan first entered politics as a member of the Detroit Chamber of Commerce, and he has been a Michigan State Senator for 2 terms. Callahan is pro-life and desires to give families and students greater choice in education and safety in schools. He supports the death penalty as a last resort in cases of first-degree murder with overwhelming evidence. He plans to budget costs by reducing income tax, though he thinks that cell phones in emergencies is a good concept. Callahan believes that the legislation is too vague and needs to be amended. Callahan believes in giving people a greater chance to pursue their goals and fulfill their needs. By the end of this debate, we think that you will see that Callahan is your man, and he deserves your vote.
Thank you very much. All right, now our media panel will start with the first issue tonight, and we've chosen these issues, so they didn't get to choose them. We'll deal with the issue of cell phone locations and emergencies, and our panel will describe the issue and then ask the questions.
Currently, wireless carriers have the ability to locate any one of their devices, but they do not have to give that information to the police without a subpoena or warrant, even if the information is requested. The bill, Cell Phones in Emergencies, sponsored by Jefferson Blue, would require wireless carriers to provide law enforcement officers with the location of requested wireless devices in instances of imminent threat or harm without a warrant. Does your candidate support this tool for emergency responders?
All right, and we'll answer that with 4 of the representatives. When I call your name, go ahead and go to the mic. That way we can go right through it. Matthew Kasinick, Alexis Gilleret, Brielle Denoyer, and Emmanuel Danig. We'll go in that order. You have 1 minute and 45 seconds for your answer, and there will be a time for challenges afterwards. The first question, again, repeat the question if you would. Z?
Does your candidate support this piece of legislation?
All right, so we'll start with Matthew Kasinick, representing Darren Thomas, Elm Party.
Take a minute and imagine you suddenly went missing. You might have been kidnapped or forced to go somewhere against your will. In the first few hours after realizing you really are missing, your family and close friends will reach out to the police. The police will search and search, chasing down leads and looking for ways to identify your abductor. After too long, the trail will grow cold. The case might never be closed. Your family might never find out what really happened. This is a real issue. According to the BBC, every year, 1,800 of the people that go missing are later found dead. This horrible outcome can be avoided. Darren Thomas believes that the answer is in your pocket. Your phone's location data could easily save your life. Even if discarded by your attacker along the way, Mr. Thomas believes it could still be a valuable tool for law enforcement to find out where you are or where you were. The apps that you use on a daily basis only use your phone's location for a few seconds. That same data has the potential to save innocent lives. Why not allow law enforcement to use this information to bring you or others home safe? Now, of course, privacy is a concern, as it should be. Mr. Thomas has found that a common misconception about location data is concerned with the way it is gathered. This would not allow law enforcement to search through your phone or your personal files. It would simply allow them the ability to triangulate your location using your phone signal, nothing else. Mr. Thomas asks you to remember what is at stake: people's lives. 1,800 innocent people just like you, and those people sitting around you. Your children, your friends, and your family. Anyone who might be put into a life-threatening situation could benefit from this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. And also in response, we'll hold our applause until the end of each issue. Thank you. The next response will be representing Nicholas Hill. Maple Party would be Alexis Gilleret.
Nicholas Hill wants the citizens of Michigan to be safe, but he also fervently believes that people should not be forced to go against their convictions on personal intrusion. In this modern era, we have technology everywhere. Nearly every person has a cell phone which can be tracked by their wireless carrier. Nicholas Hill believes that we should make it easier and faster for the police to get the information to track a phone. Hill, however, does not think that just anyone's phone should be tracked without them allowing it. That is infringing on a person's right to privacy. What he is for, though, is allowing the people to choose whether their phone is tracked or not. He wants the stipulations in the bill to change so that a citizen who would want their phone to be tracked in an emergency would go to their wireless carrier and fill out a form giving their consent to be tracked in the case of an emergency. The carrier would have their form on file and one master list with all the people who have signed their consent. The master list would then be sent by email to the police station and put on file. In an emergency, if an emergency were to occur, the police would call or go to the carrier requesting the needed information. The wireless carrier would go and give them the information after double checking. The wireless carrier would at the end of the month send a list of those phones that had been tracked by the police that month, and they would give it to the police station to double check. If any person did not want to be tracked, however, they simply do not sign the form giving their consent. They have the right to choose. This would cost nothing extra to the state, but would save vital time and lives. Nick wants people to be safe, but also does not believe we need to force this on anyone. He would want to see the current bill changed to give people the right to allow their phone to be tracked.
Okay, thank you very much. Also in response to the same question, Brielle Denoyer for Jack Mcdonald, the Oaks Party.
We all care about safety. Safety for our family, safety for our friends. Safety in Michigan is an issue. People go missing every day. 627,911 people went missing in 2013. That's over 12,000 individuals every single week. 40% are under 18. This is not right. If Mcdonald is elected, he will change that. He believes that police officers should be able to use location data from wireless carriers in emergency situations without a warrant. Seeing as how 95% of Americans own a cell phone, being able to use this data could be extremely helpful in locating these missing persons. If data from wireless carriers could have been used in 2013, that would mean that at least 596,515 people could have been found much faster. This information would not be used without the consent of the person involved. Mcdonald supports an amendment to the bill that would require citizens to give their consent to the wireless carrier when they sign the contract for the service. If the person is a minor, this consent form would be signed by their parents or legal guardian. In the area of privacy issues, there is a penalty of 93 days in prison, $500, or both, for a police officer who seeks to exploit the information for personal use. Mcdonald supports this bill because it multiplies the chances of missing persons being found, increasing their safety and therefore the safety of your family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then finally on this issue, Emmanuel Danig representing Mr. Callahan from the Willow Party.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. In regards to House Bill 4006, Cell Phones in Emergencies, Mr. Callahan strongly believes that this bill is not ready to be passed. There are too many loopholes and inconsistencies within the bill. The terms contained within the bill are not defined enough for it to be deemed safe for the public. The term emergency, for example, is not defined within the bill. This would allow a law enforcement officer with malicious intentions to access your location simply claiming that you are in an emergency, causing one, a major breach of your privacy, and two, a situation that could potentially lead to your harm. With the current language, the definition of emergency is at the discretion of the individual law enforcement officer, with the bill lacking any requirements for oversight or judicial review. Essentially, there is no structure in place, neither in writing nor requirements, that would provide adequate accountability for the police officer. Callahan believes that with the vague language in the bill, it is impossible to avoid the abuse of it. Likewise, Callahan believes that this is a breach of individual privacy. The bill allows for the government to access the person's location without a due process or warrant. It also allows the tracking of a person at any point for an undefined amount of time without a requirement for oversight or accountability. For the safety and peace of mind of the citizens of the state, this bill cannot be passed in its current state. There are many inadequacies in this bill, opening the door for its abuse, and exposing our people to an unnecessary risk of a breach of privacy and even harm. Because Roderick Callahan is committed to the safety and privacy of the people of Michigan, he believes that the bill in its current form is too weak to pass.
Very good. Thank you very much. Our panel now has questions, follow-up. Be 30 seconds per answer.
Yes, I had a question for Mr. Hill's party. You said you would want it to be an opt-out system. Why not an opt-in system? Wouldn't that protect the citizens better?
Could you rephrase your question, please?
Sure. I believe you said you'd rather have a master list of people. Everybody would be in, but you had the option to register to opt out of this list. Wouldn't it be a better rule if it protected everybody unless they opted out?
Perhaps that would be, and that could be something that originally when the law is set up, they could have everyone be part of it and you had to go and sign out if you want to change your mind. I think either way, if a person doesn't want it, they can, don't want to be tracked, they can go and take care of that.
Very good. Another panel question?
Yes, maybe anybody can ask this. Willow, I'm wondering if you can specifically though, how long does it take for a warrant or a subpoena to be issued, and wouldn't it be faster to do this?
Well, in essence, Callahan does support the essence of the bill. However, he doesn't believe that it is strong enough in patching up the loopholes that are in the bill. Can you restate the second part of your question?
Right. I'm just wondering if you can restate why you think the warrants and subpoenas is fast enough. I mean, is that fast enough? Like, you seem to be satisfied with that and worried that this would cause abuse.
Well, another solution that we are considering is having it be required for judicial review within 2 days of the incident.
Other follow-up questions from the panel?
I do have one for the rest of the parties. You mentioned that emergency situations is a little bit vague. I'm wondering if the other three parties who spoke first could talk about why they think, the ones that are supporting the bill at least, what does emergency situation mean? Is it just a missing person? Is it just a kidnapping? Or does it cover a broader range of situations?
So in the bill, it says that the emergency is defined as death or imminent injury that can result out of missing persons. A lot of that does happen in kidnappings and missing person cases.
Okay. Other parties? Any additional comments to that? So what I'm hearing then, it sounds like that this could be used in any situation where death is possible, so that could include like reckless driving. This seems like it covers a lot of different situations because death or serious injury comes from a lot of different possible situations. So I am a little worried about how vague that is. Any response to that?
In Mr. Hill's opinion, it would be strictly if they believe they have been kidnapped or the person has gone missing.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
All right, let's give them a round of applause for a good answer. All right, I think what we'll do is we'll have the panelists come up first, then the media panel can take over. So the next question deals with the Michigan budget. Answering on this one will be Maren Setsuda with the Darren Thomas Elm Party, Leah Hinnebeld with Nicholas P. Hill, the Maple Party, Andrew Hubbard, Joel McDonald's Oak Party, and Nathan Halder with Callahan's Willow Party. Media panel, you can take it from here.
The governor and the legislature are required to balance the budget yearly. Michigan went through a decade of reduced tax revenues and employed one-time monies, such as tobacco settlements, and borrowing to achieve that result. Additionally, the legislature raised the income tax from 3.9% to 4.2%, with a promise to lower it once the crisis passed. The state is now back on level ground. A big chunk of the debt has been paid off because tax revenues have gone up for 8 consecutive years, and the current budget is now $57 billion. So here's the question for you four. Should Michigan reduce its income tax to the previous level, 3.9%, and if so, how would the loss in revenue be covered? Or, since the state is now doing well, should we keep it the same and not slash the budget and rely on deficit spending?
Okay, starting off with that, 1 minute, 45 seconds for each candidate position. Maren Setsuda from Darren Thomas's campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Moffett. Mr. Thomas was a state senator in 2008 to 2016. He got to see Governor Granholm promise to the people of Michigan she would repeal her income tax once Michigan's debt was straightened out. The tax included, but was not limited to, 22% increase on business taxes, 4.2% income tax when it was previously mentioned at 3.9%. Even though the state of Michigan received $760 million as new revenue, Granholm did not keep her promise she made to the citizens of Michigan whom she promised she would serve. Darren Thomas can and will repeal the tax and fulfill his promise to the people of Michigan. The tax can be replaced because there are more workers who are paying income taxes. The income tax can be reduced because Michigan's unemployment rate has decreased since the original tax increase was passed. The United States unemployment rate is at 3.9% and Michigan's is at 4.8%, demonstrating that the state is in good position to make good on its promise to the people of Michigan. We want the people of Michigan to be able to trust the next governor and Trust him by him following through on promises. As your next governor, Darren L. Thomas will make sure that he serves the people of Michigan and follows through on his promises.
Thank you. Also, in response to the question on the budget, Leah Henneveld for Nicholas P. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. Nicholas Hill is a firm believer that money is best used when placed in the hands of the people. Now that the state is back on level ground after the lost decade, the period that our panel mentioned, where Michigan was experiencing reduced tax revenues and had to turn to one-time monies and borrowing, Hill feels that there is not a pressing reason to keep income taxes at their current level. However, Hill also realizes that the budget must be balanced and that there are certain items and services that must be paid for. For these reasons, Nicholas Hill will lower income taxes from its current 4.25% to 4.05% and gradually reduce them back to the original 3.9% over the span of his time in office. This decrease in income tax rates will grow the number of consumer expenditures and boost Michigan's economy. While Hill realizes that a decrease in revenue signifies a decrease in the budget, this plan provides time for the budget to adjust and thus avoids the potential of truly drastic budget cuts, steering our state clear of another lost decade. Nicholas Hill believes that the best way to reduce state expenditures is by offering direct primary care services as the preventative care portion of Medicaid, which would reduce Michigan's Medicaid spending by $3.5 billion, as well as reduce prices for patients by at least 20%. Extending this service to public employees would also save another $280 million, leaving the state with more to cover for the loss of revenue from the reduction from the income tax. This budget cut will balance the budget as well as allow money to go back into the hands and pockets of deserving Michiganders, all while not allowing another financial disaster to run rampant in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also responding to the budget question will be Andrew Hubbard for Joel McDonald's campaign.
The matter of money and spending is one that nearly every entity must sooner or later encounter. People deal with this issue on a wide variety of scales, and the government of your state of Michigan is tasked with managing a budget of nearly $57 billion. That's a lot of money, and Joel McDonald respects all of Michigan taxpayers who make this state's economy what it is. However, nothing is free, and the demands of those who call for more benefits to the public must necessarily clash with the demands of those who call for a lighter burden of taxes. Therefore, McDonald has resolved that no taxes shall be increased, and that when a great need for spending arises, it must be appropriated from other fields which are decided to be least critical. McDonald has chosen this point between the extremes of more spending and less taxing because the people have chosen this point. Polls surveying the public opinion have shown that while a vast majority either don't know or don't care, the public approval is at a 25-year high. The people are satisfied, and as Bert Lance once said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. McDonald believes we have already struck the perfect balance between taxing and spending, and he is committed to defend it. However, McDonald does not leave his budget plan completely without adaptability. In fact, he is already aware of at least one area in which immediate reappropriation is necessary. Our schools are suffering terribly, and McDonald believes that a transfer of money from Medicaid programs is justified. Because, after all, the future of our schools is the future of our children, and that's why I encourage you to vote Joel McDonald for a new tomorrow.
Thank you. Also in response, Nathan Halder for Roderick Callahan.
All right, so how many of you guys like paying lots of taxes? Anyone? One hand. I would imagine that not very many of you would agree with that statement. Mr. Callahan's stance on the budget is simple. Instead of the government taking your money, processing it, and then spitting it back out at you every now and then, keep your money in the first place. Spend it the way that you want to spend your money. It is not the government's business to stick its hand in your pockets and take your money out. In 2007, the Democrats raised our income tax. They said that they were going to lower it soon afterwards. Well, here we are. It's been 11 years, and they are at the exact same rate that they have been. Once Callahan is in office, I can assure you that he is going to be the man to get something done. His number one priority will be lowering your taxes and making sure that you get to keep more of the money that you have earned. In addition, As a Christian, Mr. Callahan takes the biblical principle of stewardship very seriously. He's going to do everything in his power to end the wasteful spending that is festering in our government right now. There's going to be a simple rule. If it's not necessary, it's not going in the budget. Last year, for example, the Michigan government gave $2.5 million to pay for a fair. And in addition, the current government keeps funneling money into a mega bureaucracy called the MEDC, which according to the Mcdonald Center for Public Policy, essentially does nothing. Cutting that out of our budget alone would save us $181 million. Do you imagine what good we could do with that kind of money? So, let me say this. Mr. Callahan was a businessman, and if he had spent money as carelessly when he was in business as our government is right now, he would have been out of a job a long time ago. So, when we elect Callahan to office, the waste is going to end, and individuals are finally going to be able to keep more of their hard-earned money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give them a hand for a good round of questions and answers. I want to remind the campaigns that you must issue a challenge on one of the remaining 3 questions, so don't forget that part. We're going to now move to panel questions following up on this issue. You have a challenge?
I have a challenge for the Elm Party. You said that the increased population of the state of Michigan will increase tax revenues, and you can use that to decrease the income tax rate and keep the same amount of money. However, it seems to me that the increased population of the state of Michigan will also increase spending in areas such as schools and welfare and many other areas.
Yes, 30 seconds response.
Thank you. What I did say was that Michigan's unemployment rate has decreased and that there are more workers now, and since we have more workers, they are paying more income tax. I didn't say anything specifically about population. I just said how we have more jobs that more people now have. We're paying more income taxes.
Okay.
Can I issue a challenge?
You may, sir.
All right. The Oak Party, I believe, said that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's how they describe the current system. So I'd like to ask you, if our taxes keep on getting raised with the promise that it'll later be lowered, so, we have the gas tax that was just thrown on us. We have, this tax that was supposed to go away, but it's still here. How can you describe that as not broken?
Well, certainly where there are major parts broken, those need to be fixed. But on the current rate of taxes, people are generally happy with the rate of taxes as they are. And so where there's obvious waste, that will be eliminated, of course, and that those freed up monies will go back to the people. But where spending is necessary, the taxes will stay.
Okay, follow-up questions from the panel, unless there are more challenges. Okay. You have a challenge?
I do.
All right.
Sorry to challenge you back, but you mentioned education and moving more money to our public schools or education system. Right now we have a $366 million federal dollar grant for education. What do you suppose you are going to use on that, and what's your opinion on our school systems then that we need to change?
I was not... Okay. So, well, an approximate amount of $200 million would have been added to the school systems, and with that would come increased security for schools, as well as increased funding for programs which help kids which aren't quite in the middle, which is what our current schools are designed for. Mcdonald is for making schools more individualized.
Okay, very good. Panel questions?
Yes, I have a question for the Maple and the Oak parties. If I remember, both of you discussed cutting Medicaid as a potential way to offset any budget decrease or any revenue decrease. Is that right?
Yes.
And at the same time, you said that you want to cut taxes because we should help people economically. Is that right? To help people.
May I clarify our statement?
Yes.
So we simply stated that we would, for Medicaid, for the preventative care portion, we would be switching to the direct primary care services, which is basically a different way of paying doctors that reduces prices. So doctors are really offering to lower prices or accept payment in different ways so that they can help more patients. And this would reduce Medicaid spending by $3.5 billion and potentially another $280 million if we made this available to public employees. And so we wouldn't really be decreasing the amount of care at all. It would just simply be cheaper for the state and for their constituents.
I see. Thank you. So then to the Mcdonald party, how do you square cutting Medicaid, which helps poor people, and cutting taxes, which is also supposed to help people?
McDonald is in favor of cutting taxes where significant waste is reduced, but for the most part, things like cuts in areas like Medicaid will go to other more necessary areas such as education.
Okay, one more follow-up question from the panel on this one.
And this is for the Callahan and Thomas campaigns. Both of you emphasized maintaining Governor Granholm's promise. Would you say that wanting to do this is basically continuing what Governor Granholm started?
I would say that it's simply the fact of maintaining integrity in the government. People have to be able to trust their leaders. And so when your leaders say, okay, we're going to lower your taxes, and that doesn't happen, that is a major problem. So it's simply a fact of establishing integrity and letting people keep more of what they earn.
I would like to, Mr. Thomas is in full agreement with Callahan's campaign. When you elect someone as your governor, you put your trust in your life in their hands, and if they cannot guarantee their promise and fulfill their promise, then that's an issue, and Mr. Thomas will definitely stay true to his word.
Okay, very good. We're going to move on. Let's give these spokespeople a warm round of applause. Well done. All right, we'll now move on to the death penalty, a very grave issue. Speaking on this issue will be Faith Hawks from the Darren Thomas Elm Party, Nicholas Fenn from Hill's Maple Party, Levi Raymond from McDonald's Oak Party, and Grace Rainey from Callahan's Willow Party. And the media will ask the questions.
Since the 1800s, Michigan's Constitution has prohibited the death penalty, but the Liberty Red Caucus is currently sponsoring a bill that would amend the Michigan Constitution to allow the death penalty in cases of first-degree murder. What is your candidate's stance in relation to the death penalty? Should the state constitution be amended, or should this be done in a bill? Should there be potential limitations placed upon this where the evidence is against the accused determined to be overwhelming? I'd like to hear your candidate's thoughts on each one of those questions. Thank you.
All right, we'll start with this side, Faith Hawks from the Thomas campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. Darren Thomas is taking a stand against legalizing the death penalty in Michigan. It is expensive, immoral, and it goes against his Christian principles. The death penalty, according to the Associated Press, has been found to be millions of dollars more expensive than other available sentencing options, such as life imprisonment. However, so much more important than expense is morals. And as a Christian, Darren Thomas uses God's word to determine what is right and wrong. In Romans 12:19, the Bible states, "Vengeance is mine, and I will repay, says the Lord." Vengeance can be defined as punishment inflicted or retribution enacted for an injury or wrong. Vengeance is enacted when the death penalty is enforced. The government is trying to play the role of God. and goes against what has been laid down in the Bible. God is the creator and giver of life, and only God can take life away. Not man. The choice is not ours. The death penalty is premeditated killing. That is in direct defiance of God's laws. Because Darren Thomas has devoted his life to serving God, his family, his community, and the state of Michigan, any immoral ending of a human life of any age or for any reason is exactly what he fights against. The pro-life movement has been a cause for which Mr. Thomas has pledged his support. Therefore, upholding the death penalty is in direct contradiction of his pro-life stance, Christian beliefs, and more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then we also have, for Nicholas Hill speaking, Nicholas Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator and lead News Network and constituents. Sergeant Nicholas Hill is opposed to amending the Michigan Constitution on the death penalty. The first and most important reason he's against the death penalty is due to his pro-life beliefs. Sergeant Hill is 100% pro-life for all stages of life. As a result, he also opposes euthanasia and assisted suicide. He will always remember, like it says in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and our certain unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness must always be protected. The second reason Sergeant Nicholas Hill opposes the death penalty is because he believes the state will be sued, which would waste, of course, taxpayer dollars fighting those lawsuits. And on top of that, it will cost the state millions of dollars to perform one execution. The death penalty itself has cost California $4.004 billion for only 13 executions. That's $308 million per execution, which is, as of right now, approximately 1.3% of the Michigan state budget, while $4.004 billion of your taxpayer money would be approximately 23.8% of our state's budget this fiscal year. Do we really want to use that much taxpayer money on executions? Sergeant Hill does not think so. These are the reasons Sergeant Nicholas P. Hill opposes the death penalty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Also speaking to the death penalty, Levi Raymond for Joel Mcdonald's campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Joel Mcdonald is in opposition of the death penalty. He feels that it's too severe of a punishment for those who have committed first-degree murder. McDonald values human life greatly and doesn't feel that it should be man's decision to end a life. McDonald feels that since the life of a wrongful convicted person is always a possibility, it is simply too great of a risk. Nationwide, since 1973, 140 death row prisoners have been released, with new evidence of discovery. In the same time, more than 1,200 have been executed. Adopting the death penalty will not help Michigan's future generations. Studies have shown that practicing the death penalty does not deter crime. The 14 states that do not have capital punishment have homicide rates at below or national average. Capital punishment has a very high price tag. In fact, most of the expenses is incurred before and during the trials. Additionally, it takes away from the money available for measures that actually deter crime. McDonald also feels that death penalty unfairly targets the poor. Almost all the prisoners on death row were unable to afford their very own attorney when the case went to trial. Michigan voters have never supported the death penalty, and therefore we have not been a state that executes those that have been accused. Since Michigan Constitution was crafted in 1800s, the death penalty has never been prohibited across the states. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Also on this issue is Grace Ring speaking for Roderick Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Moffett. Roderick Callahan is in support of amending the Constitution to allow the death penalty in cases of first-degree murder. Callahan wishes to reserve the death penalty in Michigan for the most brutally conscienceless murders. In no way does he want for the lives of these men to be ended. However, he does want justice. And the sad fact about our fallen world is that extreme situations cause for extreme measures of justice to be taken. Callahan plans on a system that will be used as a filter to discern who deserves such extreme measures of justice. Put another way, to sentence killers who have been overwhelmingly convicted to less than death would be dishonoring to God. We are called to act justly as God acts, and to sentence such a murderer to a lifetime in prison would be grossly disproportionate to the heinousness of the crime committed. Callahan believes that the evidence needed to convict a first-degree murderer to death must be overwhelming as determined by the court's jury and judge. This policy is in the name of the Fifth Amendment, which says that no person shall be held to answer for the capital crime unless on the indictment of the grand jury, and that no person shall be deprived of life except by due process of law. In conclusion, Callahan's position on death penalty is sound both ethically in that he is following the call by God to establish justice, and sound constitutionally by adhering to the establishments of the Fifth Amendment. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Reminder that you do have challenges remaining if you want to use them. Panel, have follow-up questions?
Indeed I do. My first question is for the Elm Party and the Willow Party. You both mentioned in your statements that the basis for your candidate's moral opposition is the Bible and their Christian beliefs. Last time I checked, the Bible is not the official law book of the state of Michigan, so are there any extra biblical reasons why your candidate would oppose, or for the reasons for what the positions you're taking? Is there something outside the Bible that your candidate can point to?
Yes. Our candidate is very concerned about the population of Michigan's moral conscience, as well as their Christian principles that surround them within their church, their family, and their community. So we are taking into account not only just the Bible's take on it, but also the fact that many Christian communities, as well as religious communities in the state of Michigan, struggle with the moral choices behind the death penalty.
I would say Callahan agrees with Elm, as well as Callahan firstly answers to God and then to the state, because the state has been given authority from God.
Okay. And we have a challenge?
Yes, challenge question for the Willow Party. Just real quick, so what would Callahan's view be if somebody was sincerely sorry for murdering somebody? What if they did it under the influence? They didn't really know what they were doing. Somebody might have given somebody drugs. They might have gone crazy. It wasn't exactly their fault. For instance, there was a person in California. This is what happened to this man. He was sincerely sorry when he realized what happened. For 14 years, he tried to get off of death row, and they killed him anyway. They threw his case out. What are your views on that?
In that instance, Callahan would propose that the victim or the accused offender plea insanity.
Okay, very good. Follow-up questions?
Final question is also directed to the Willow Party. You had a couple different things that you stated. One was brutal consciousness, something to that effect. Crimes that were committed brutally, consciously. You referenced specifically this would only apply to men, so I was curious if you could clarify that. I'm really curious, though, ultimately about limitations you place on this. Your only definition of what would be acceptable for capital punishment was something that was done brutally, consciously, if I'm quoting you correctly. So what about if the person who committed the crime was someone who was extremely young when they did the crime, or mentally unstable, or, as was referenced a little bit, someone who was perhaps under the influence of something? Is there going to be any consideration taken into account for those types of situations?
Yes, so thank you for your question. First of all, I think you misheard me. Callahan wishes to reverse the death penalty in Michigan for those brutally conscienceless murders, so the people who do not have conscience.
Brutally
consciences.
conscienceless. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. And he also, good question, for killers, for first-degree murderers under the age of 18 would be put in juvenile detention for extremely long measures unless that would not be effective in stopping him from unjustly offending others.
Okay, so the last one would just be mental stability.
Mental stability.
Or dealing under the influence. Someone's under the influence or they're like mentally unstable, say they have a mental handicap.
In that case, they can plead insanity, as I said to Nick. Yes.
Okay, very good. Let's give these young people a great hand for that good debate. Awesome. Thank you all. All right, and the final topic tonight is about protecting our public schools, and I know that you were handed cards to ask questions on. We will have a brief audience participation. If you have a card with a question on it, hold it up and our staff will come get it. Just because you submit a question doesn't mean we'll ask it, but you can still submit them. All right, so this one will be, the representatives will be Jacob Williams for the Thomas Party, Heidi Rice for the Nicholas Hill, Allison Wigdring for Joel McDonald, and Grace Smith for Roderick Callahan, and the media panel has the question.
In order to protect our young children in Michigan and also possibly the Michigan budget, Michigan lawmakers are considering several gun-related measures following a deadly shooting at a Florida high school. One of these measures includes arming teachers in the public schools. What is your candidate's view on this gun-related measure?
Okay, we'll start with Jacob Williams from Darren Thomas's campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. Thomas believes in safe schools. The students that attend the places of our learning in our state should have the option of defending themselves. Darren Thomas believes this can be achieved by arming staff, which would lead to the sharp reduction of the risk of school shootings. In the case of a threat to a school or class, staff would be able to handle the situation without being defenseless. Any teachers and staff that would be armed in participating schools would have to have thorough training on proper gun safety, especially focused on the school setting with an active shooter. An example of this system being used by a state can be found in Texas. According to an article written by the Houston Press in February 2018, 172 schools across 1,200 districts have adopted arming teachers in schools. The staff that were a part of these schools were trained specifically to respond to active shooters in schools. This system was designed for schools that did not have security and rural schools who were positioned farther from law enforcement. After establishing armed staff in these schools, there have been no instances of staff or students using firearms abusively, and there have been no threats of violence to these schools. This system implemented in Texas strongly follows the principles of Mr. Thomas, who wants in Michigan schools. Since the 1980s to 2012, 297 people of various ages have been killed by school shootings. Each decade that goes by, the number of deaths by school shootings rise. Darren Thomas is devoted to eliminating the needless waste of life from shootings, defending the rights of schools to protect themselves, and promoting a safer Michigan for all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Now Heidi Rice will speak on behalf of Nicholas Hill on this question.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. The term school shooting has become very common in recent years, and schools have gradually begun to enhance their security systems. But you have to ask yourself the question, how effective will metal detectors, extra surveillance cameras, and updated alarm and safety systems be? While these tools can be helpful, they are very costly. In fact, the state of Ohio spent $15 million over the course of 4 years to update surveillance in 3,000 schools. This is approximately $3.8 million just towards surveillance per year. In addition, these surveillance cameras cannot defend the children in our schools the same way a teacher with a firearm could. For the same amount, Michigan could arm 18,750 teachers. Sergeant Nicholas Hill desires to provide the necessary training and equipment for the teachers in our schools to create a safer environment for the children in our society. He will do so by implementing a plan similar to the Guardian Plan, which was utilized in Texas. This plan allows school boards to determine which employees will be carrying, as well as determining the training standards that will be used, and allowing each school to decide what is best for their students based on the size of the school, the number of lockdowns that have taken place, or even previous shootings that have happened. The schools that feel most at risk will be able to attain the necessary training and equipment to protect the students in their care. Being a sergeant in the U.S. Army has helped Hill understand the importance of taking the necessary steps to ensure proper training of the teachers, so he will be working with the schools to make this happen. Furthermore, Hill feels there will be numerous benefits such as quicker response time, fewer school shootings, as shooters tend to target gun-free zones, and ultimately making it possible to save lives. Hill cares deeply for his fellow Michiganders as he wants to serve them by providing safety for them. As an option for school, this defense measure will make safety possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Also in this issue, Allison Rigtrink with Joel McDonald's campaign.
Thank you, Mr. Muffet. In the first 21 weeks of 2018, there were 23 school shootings across the United States, averaging a little over one school shooting a week. The average school shooting lasts 12 and a half minutes. According to the Homeland Security, the average police response time is 18 minutes. That means, on average, the police would arrive to the school 5 minutes after the shooting was over. Having authorized personnel on site that are able to respond way faster would not only be able to stop a shooting in the process, but it could prevent it in the first place. If a potential shooter enters this building knowing that someone is going to be there to respond, they'd be less likely to attack the school in the first place. Joel McDonald wants our kids and the next generation to be our main priority. He wants to make our schools a safer place, and in order to do that, he proposes we require a certain number of authorized personnel to be in each school building for the entire day. The authorized personnel would either be teachers that have gone through extensive training and background checks, or local police deputies that would be stationed at the schools. The teachers that are approved and carried throughout the school year would be compensated with a pay increase provided by the state. We would not force any teachers to carry, and if the teachers in that district refuse, local deputies would be placed in the schools instead. The amount of authorized personnel in each school will be based on the amount of students in each building. Throughout the school year, over 50 million kids arrive at a public elementary or secondary school every day. These kids are at risk of being victims of a school shooting because they are not being protected enough. As it is, our banks, our business buildings, our sports games, our movie stars, and our politicians are all protected more than our kids. That needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Also on this issue, Grace Smith with Roderick Callahan's campaign.
Thank you. Roderick Callahan firmly believes in the sanctity of human life. He additionally believes in the protection of lives, specifically those of our students. Therefore, he fully supports properly trained and educated teachers being permitted to conceal carry their own registered firearm. Current and future legislature, Callahan's support is not designed to hand out guns to every teacher, nor does it require all teachers to carry. It simply means that he supports the current and up-and-coming legislation, as well as Michigan's Constitution, Article 1. There are already existing bills that support individuals who have obtained a CPL or concealed pistol license to enter gun-free zones. Two of these bills, which were passed in 2017, are Senate Bills 586 and 584. Mr. Callahan desires to enact the same concept for teachers. Michigan has one of the most rigorous programs for concealed pistol licenses in the entire United States. The program involves training both at the range and in a classroom, as well as a background check. Michigan's quality of concealed pistol licensing is well known throughout the entire United States and is recognized as valuable in 39. This means that teachers have already been extensively vetted for felonies, misdemeanors, and mental instability. Since he supports teachers arming themselves, Mr. Callahan does not require a government-controlled program or additional tax dollars. If innocent students are dying or even coming close to that unimaginable situation, Callahan does not believe that it is biblically right to stand by and observe. He believes Psalms 82 commands believers to rescue the weak and needy and to deliver them from the wicked. If the shooter is made it into his school and is gunning down children, there is no excuse for denying that final line of immediate and absolute defense.
Okay, very good. Let's give these guys a round of applause for those responses. And since we have a love fest on that one and we're behind, I'm going to just move to the audience participation part. So we have any questions for these folks from the audiences? Somebody up there's bound to have one good question.
So somebody out in the audience is wondering if your candidates have considered any alternative methods to protect the schools, possibly keeping the attackers out of the building in the first place. Metal detectors may not work, but possibly steel doors. Most modern schools are built out of concrete cinder blocks and steel, much like the building we're in right now. Wouldn't it be cheaper and more long-term fiscally responsible just to reinforce the buildings we have?
Some of the shooters that have been in previous schools have been as students, so they will still be able to come into this school regardless of what things that we put in place for that, plus those extra security measures cost more money, whereas the guns will deter them from bringing the guns, their own guns, into the school.
Anyone else want to respond to that? 15 seconds per response. Yes, sir.
The problem with putting in permanent objects for a long period of time is slack. You can get slack under that circumstance, and so there might not be as good a chance of having a defense in there.
I agree with both the Maple and the Elm Party. As I said earlier, it takes police around 18 minutes to get to the school. So assuming a shooter got into the building because of that slack, the police wouldn't arrive until after the shooting is over. Yes, and I would additionally like to add that Mr. Callahan, as I've mentioned before, is doing it and is going about his ideas in such a way that it will not take tax dollars away from the current protection that is going on in the schools. There was a legislature that was passed, there was a certain amount of legislature that was passed in 2017, 5 bills that gave $18.3 million more dollars to the defense of schools. This would not be taken away at all in the defense, in Callahan's plan for defense.
Okay, very good. A couple more media questions from other issues.
Sure. I'm sorry, one more on this issue. How are teachers trained, certified, and then protected if they are to carry guns in schools? And where is the money for this training, the firearms themselves? Where is it all coming from?
The wonderful thing, again, about Mr. Callahan's plan is that the training that is given to them in the CPL, which is the concealed pistol license, prepares them for all of those scenarios. And it is done on the individual's own payment.
Anybody else wishing to respond to that?
Mr. Thomas believes that every teacher and staff member who should carry a firearm would take the proper CPL training and registration. They would have a background check, as is allowed, and they would they'd be protected from, if there was an incident that required them to use their firearm, from having to be put under charges.
Okay, very good. Another follow-up question? Got time for 2 more, and then we've got to move on.
This is going to be an audience question.
Yes.
Regarding, this is a hybrid with arming teachers and the death penalty.
Okay.
So I don't know if the parties would like to pick one of those people to answer this, but for all the candidates against the death penalty, which I believe are the Hill, Mcdonald, and Thomas candidates, how can one advocate arming teachers, or police for that matter, with the intent to defend students by killing a rampaging student shooter, yet be timid enough to not execute a criminal who's done the same thing outside of school?
Our candidate would like to stress that our teachers will be trained to immobilize shooters and not shoot to kill. So it would be different because we are not giving them license to shoot immediately. Their first option will be to immobilize.
In agreement with the Maple Party, our candidate would be doing the same. The teachers would be trained to immobilize and stop the shooting.
If immobilizing wasn't an option, would the teachers be empowered to kill the shooter?
Yes, because one life is not worth the life of multiple children in the school, because at most of the school shootings, more than one person died, whereas if the teachers were armed, they would shoot the shooter on sight, and there would be no more deaths, just one, hopefully.
Anyone else wishing to answer that? Okay, one more question from the audience, and then we have to move to the final closing statements.
This is a budgetary question, so if the people who did the budgets responses can come up. From our audience, concerning taxes, what would happen if the state needs to spend more money and they just don't have enough? Doesn't that sort of create a situation where we try to keep it in citizens' pockets, but we end up shooting ourselves in the foot?
We'll go on this end, right down from this end to the other side. 15 seconds for each one.
In order to avoid
30 seconds, sorry.
In order to avoid that situation, Mr. Thomas will look at ineffective government programs with higher up budgets that we can reduce so we don't have to get into that issue.
This is exactly why Mr. Hill proposed reducing the budget as well as gradually reducing the income tax. Our candidate doesn't want to throw the state into a situation it's not prepared for. So he would lower income taxes gradually over the span of his time in office in order to ensure that our state doesn't end up in a situation like the last decade again.
Okay, keep going.
So, Mr. McDonald's first action, if such a spending emergency were to come about, would be to reduce spending in other areas where it's deemed less necessary. If that does not work, then the state of Michigan has a fund which is nearly $1 billion large for emergencies such as this. Failing even that, if taxes need to be raised, then they will, but that will be the very last line of defense against an emergency such as this.
Mr. Callahan believes that the size of the government is currently far too big. And so to help decrease that, we're going to be cutting taxes and we're going to be cutting the budget, at least unnecessary portions of it. Because the government is never the solution, the government is the problem, as I believe Ronald Reagan said.
Okay, very good. Let's give them a hand for that, and then we'll have the final students come up. Each of the campaigns have chosen someone to give the closing statements. Carly Borma will be speaking for Mr. Thomas, Joshua Adair for Mr. Hill, Emily Ostoff for Mr. McDonald, and Emma Williams for Mr. Callahan. You guys can all come up, and we'll go in that order, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you consider all of the information that you have heard this evening, I would like to remind you that there will never be a candidate whose position exactly matches your beliefs. However, I urge you to weigh each argument carefully and choose the candidate who most closely aligns with your values and positions. You have heard where Darren Thomas stands on cell phones and emergencies. He wants the cell phone data to be available to emergency responders. You have heard where Darren Thomas stands on budget priorities. He will fulfill his promise to voters in Michigan to eliminate the income tax increase. You have heard where Darren Thomas stands on the death penalty. He opposes the death penalty due to its moral nature and his strong Christian principles and pro-life stance. And you have heard where Darren Thomas stands on arming teachers in schools. He wants to keep your students and our future safe. You, the voice of Michigan, and your values are the reason that Darren Thomas is running in this campaign. Therefore, we urge you... Thank you.
Joshua Adair for Nicholas Hill.
Founding father Fisher Ames once declared that the rights of conscience or bearing arms of changing the government are declared to be inherent in the people. Well, Nicholas Hill is here to firmly uphold the values that have built the foundations of our nation and our state. He will put into action effective strategies that will rebuild the crumbling foundations of our state. Nicholas Hill is a firm believer in arming teachers, those who can truly prevent tragedies and thus save lives. He will firmly promote the freedom of choice and the value of life and fairness. Secondly, he will stop the unnecessary and ridiculous expenditure by the government by upholding Christian stewardship values. And he will put money back into the hands of the citizens of Michigan through significantly shrinking the income tax. This will put money back into your hands, which will significantly benefit us, and thus continue to make our state of Michigan and give us our state of Michigan. So please, join us and give us the honor of your vote. And vote for Nicholas Hill. Thank you.
All right, very good, thank you. And Emily Ostoff, speaking for Joel Mcdonald.
The dreams of golden glory in the future will not come unless by the height of our heart and the strong of our hands, by our own mighty deeds, we make them come true. It's by Theodore Roosevelt. With Joel Mcdonald, we can make those dreams a reality. Joel's unique blend of talents make him superb for the role placed in front of him. His passion for instilling the best safety and education policies in our schools and establishing programs to better help our teachers and students show his concern for our future. By additional safety and response plans created in the cases of emergency situations in our schools, safety of our children is always put first. Joe's value of human life is something he stands for passionately. His concern for keeping all safe in emergency situations is seen through the policies he will take place by correctly administering safe and helpful resources. McDonald's dedication for a bright and better future is seen in all of his efforts. So, we encourage you to vote Joel McDonald for a better tomorrow. Let's make our dream a reality.
Very good, thank you. And finally, Emma Williams for Roderick Callahan.
Roderick Callahan is a man who values people and their needs. He wants to empower individuals. He is committed to the safety of our students and will ensure this by giving teachers the right to bear arms in public schools if they have proper licensing and training. Callahan believes in giving greater choice in education for families because every student is different. Callahan also supports the death penalty in cases of overwhelming evidence and first-degree murder, but will only be used as a last resort. He plans to revamp the budget by reducing income tax and cutting costs. He does not support cell phones in emergencies because the legislation is too vague. Callahan is passionate about his conservative convictions and is pro-life. His goal is to enable people to be successful. Callahan is the man for Michigan. Vote for Roderick Callahan and the Willow Party in the upcoming election. Thank you so much.
All right, very good. All right, that concludes the debate. A couple final comments. I want to encourage all of the students. There are other issues that these candidates have positions on in addition to the ones that we chose tonight for the debate. So I urge each of you who are going to be going to the polls tomorrow evening to approach these campaigns, find out where they stand on the issues, do your homework, become an informed voter. Don't just go in there and do eeny, meeny, miny, mo. This is a great way to exercise your privilege. And tomorrow night will be the election. Just so everyone else knows, these students have been doing fundraisers. They have been creating advertisements. I think, do we have TV ads coming out? Television ads coming out? And they have posters all over the place. They've been going door to door. They've been working really, really hard. And so I would like to have each of the parties stand up individually. And I want to give them a round of applause, starting with the Elm Party at this table. Would you please stand and let us say thank you? Well done. You can stay standing. The next candidate is Maple Party, Nicholas Hill. Let's give them a round of applause. Well done. And following them, the Oak Party for Joel Mcdonald. And on the far end, the Willow Party with Roderick Callahan. Let's give them a round of applause. Well done. And let's also give a round of applause for our media panel and our timekeeper. Thank you all for a good job, well done. And I just want to say, if I ever ran for office, I'm not going to, but if I ever did, I'd hire you guys as my campaign team. So let's give them all another round of applause. Thank you very much. And I guess you guys can be seated. We have some housekeeping. Housekeeping. This is Amy Chauvin, our program director.
So we are here live right now, just moments after 2018's Gubernatorial Debate Night has ended. I'm here with Jacob Belanti and Jonathan Meyer to share our thoughts and some memorable quotes from this evening's debate. Jacob, to start it off, would you like to tell us your opinion of the debate as a whole?
I thought it went really well. I'm glad that the candidates, there was difference between them. I mean, on a couple issues, they did agree a lot, but budgeting, for instance, there was a lot of difference between the candidates, and I'm really excited about that.
And John, you?
Well, I thought it went well I thought it went well as overall as well. I really liked the debate that they had back and forth between the right to arm teachers and whatnot, and I like the different opinions on that.
Again, I would agree with that. A lot of the candidates, they did seem to agree, but at times different ones really made their mark and stood out from the crowd, and those were the special moments that hopefully we can highlight here in the next few minutes for you. So let's first go over the cell phones and emergencies bill. John, do you have any thoughts on this one specifically and the different candidates' views on it?
Well, I wasn't really, yeah.
I can take this.
I thought that the different opinions were really good. That's all I have to say about that right now.
I felt like they all had like a different take on it. Hill and Mcdonald were very similar on this, where they basically agreed on an amendment to this cell phone bill. Thomas, I felt like, really hit the emotional level of this by saying that we need to make sure that we can save these people in time. This is a very necessary bill to pass. So they really hit the emotional impact of that. But I think I have to agree most with Callahan. The wording of the bill did seem a little bit vague on emergency, and so my question specifically would be, well, how much time passes before emergency is declared? So basically, how do we know someone's not just going out for a long walk or just stays over somewhere else for a night? How do we know when something is officially declared an emergency situation?
Those were my opinions as well. Yes, it was very vague, the definition of an emergency, and rather whether or not a disappearance is an emergency truly, or if it is specifically planned by the individual for their own personal reasons, to basically hack into their cell phones and access their location without permission. Seems like a privacy infringement to me. But I enjoyed how the Elm campaign really did hit on this issue of privacy and stated that it would not be an infringement since it was simply a location. However, that's really open to interpretation. Jacob, do you have any thoughts on that? Just the difference between whether the location is an infringement on privacy or if it is not?
I would still say it's an infringement on privacy, but depending on how you look at it, it may be a necessary infringement on privacy or maybe not. It's really up to the voters on this one.
All right, now let's move on to the second bill that was covered, and this was the one revolving around tax cuts. And really specifically, what came out a lot in the debate was whether or not previous Governor Granholm's promises to keep income taxes low are really relevant for us today, and how much we need to support those promises in order to create integrity in our government.
I really enjoyed this category because I think it really shows where the candidates differ from one another, and it's a very gray area, so we'll get a lot of differing opinions. Like just between Hill and Mcdonald, the whole healthcare situation that they were questioned about was really interesting. I liked Hill's approach to it by just not necessarily decreasing healthcare, but just making an adjustment. I'd like to hear about more what that adjustment is, but I do think that's an interesting concept to have. And I'm glad how Mcdonald answered that question, like how they would respond, like how healthcare would respond. They basically said that it was education in this circumstance is more important than the healthcare. So I thought that was an interesting position they took on that as well.
Yeah, I really did like how Maple Party answered that question that the media panel gave them about lowering the healthcare and about it's not actually lowering it, and just re-clarifying that. I really did like how they did that.
What I thought was interesting, John, was really the difference drawn between the candidate Thomas and Hill, because first we heard from Thomas, and it was stating that tax would be lowered. But then we heard from a representative for candidate Hill, and they stated that the income taxes would be lowered gradually and eventually in order to provide economic security and stability. I liked how that plan was very detailed and well thought out.
Yeah, I really appreciate that as well. Basically, they had it all planned out.
And then moving over to Callahan, they really stood out on their own in this one with the passion with which the position was presented, stating that it was really the way that we want to spend our money and that the taxpayers should be able to keep their money in the first place and not get it back through a secondary means like welfare or Medicaid or such.
Yeah, definitely.
This is definitely going to be one of the biggest deciding issues for the voters. It's a very interesting topic.
Now, one thing, Jacob, I wanted to get your opinion on is specifically with candidate Mcdonald and his stance on this issue. It was stated that essentially money would be cut from Medicaid and given to schools. Now, in my opinion, I'm seeing a contrast of values between health, specifically for the elderly who are using Medicaid, and education for the young. So is it really a correct value statement when you put education of children above proper health care coverage for elderly citizens?
Yeah, so basically how I believe they see it in this circumstance is that healthcare has like a lot of wasteful programs in it. The Medicaid programs have a lot of waste, and yet public schools don't necessarily have a lot of waste, they just don't have enough funding. So we're taking from a program that's just bad at managing their money and giving it to a program that just needs more money. So both these programs have problems, but they're not necessarily the same problems. So basically what they're doing is just transferring the money to the program they believe could best solve their problem with it.
All right, and with that, let's move on to our next issue, and that is the hotly debated death penalty. John, do you have opening thoughts on this?
Not really on this one. I do have on the next one, though.
Okay, and Jacob?
This is always a very interesting one every year. I notice consistently there'll be one person who stands out and supports the death penalty, and yet everyone else will oppose it. I think the biggest determining factor is the economic reasons. I know a death penalty is really a moral issue that people like to look at, but if you really look at the numbers, it's highly inefficient to carry out the death penalty. But then again, you have to weigh out the justice of the whole thing versus the cost. Is it truly going to prevent crime? A lot of people brought up statistics saying that no, just because we execute people doesn't make sure our communities are safer. But I'd really like to see where that evidence came from. So, yeah.
It was interesting, I felt, when the Hill campaign brought out the declaration basically for all men to be created equal, to have the right to life, essentially, was the bottom of their argument.
Yeah.
However, when you say that one person has the right to life, to not die for their actions, not be put in for the death penalty, you're not respecting somebody else's right to life. From my perspective, that was taken away by this, if the person was a murderer per se. And so it's really a contrast on whose right to life you're protecting and whose you're going to uphold with this system.
Yeah, I remember specifically, I forget who challenged it. I believe it was Hill challenging Callahan. And basically they asked Callahan, they presented this really hypothetical situation to Callahan. They're saying, well, what if this person didn't really know what they were doing and they were under influence of maybe drugs or essentially like that.
Sorry.
Yes, yeah. And they're sincerely sorry about it. Well, first-degree murder, I feel like it's a very black and white issue. If you're convicted for first-degree murder, it's premeditated murder. You're clear of mind. You know exactly what you're doing. You have all your cognitive, mentally cognitive, and I think just something like this, that question wasn't really phrased appropriately to Callahan, and I think they defended that well.
I definitely agree.
I don't think that if they were under the influence of something, I don't think they would have been charged with first-degree murder in the first place. So I don't think that really would have actually counted. I did find it interesting that a problem of mentally ill or something like that they plead insanity. I did find that fact rather interesting.
Yeah.
And also the last, I feel, sort of controversial aspect of this part of the debate was Thomas and Callahan and their use of God and biblical principles when it comes to how you should run your government. And I'm not saying that you can't employ those principles, but as it was clearly stated, that the Bible is not a law book. Yeah. And so to say that law has to conform to everything in the Bible when there's thousands of people within our own state that hold no commitment to the Bible or its principles seems like an unrepresentative standard to measure your policies against.
Yeah, I noticed like this issue especially is where a lot of the candidates' personal beliefs come out, and I'm glad we get to hear from them all, but we want to make sure that the governors also are reflecting the entirety of the state's beliefs. I mean, Michigan is a pretty diverse state, and according to religious beliefs, yes, we do have a large Christian population. We also have a fairly large Muslim population compared to a lot of states.
Yeah.
And yeah, we want to make sure we're including everyone when we pick our governor. So I'm glad that these candidates have come out like with their religious beliefs, but I hope that's not just what solely they're asking voters to vote on, is just their religious beliefs.
Definitely. All right, now let's move on to talking about guns and the use of them by teachers. John, did you have comments on this?
I did have one comment, but it comes in a little bit later.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was an interesting topic. I think there was a couple cool things pointed out by the candidates. Thomas pointed out that they would like to implement arming teachers because they referenced the system in Texas, and I was really glad that I could see like, oh, this actually is in the current system. People are actually using this, and it's working. So I was glad that they brought that perspective. And Mcdonald pointed out another thing that I thought was really interesting, the 12 minutes versus 18 minutes discrepancy, how long a school shooting lasts versus how long it usually takes for authorities to get there. I thought that was a really interesting number and something to keep in mind, that usually the authorities can't get there in time.
Now, my thought before you go on that number, I was wondering in my seat, hearing that, it seemed very extreme, 18 minutes, when oftentimes the police department and school are near each other geographically. And so what I was feeling is that potentially that a long time and the shortest response time were factored into the average, which might have skewed off the actual response time numbers.
Yeah, that's another number that really needs to be fact-checked more, but I just thought it was an interesting index point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I was wondering about this is, I know it's going to sound to use basically a common term, malpractice insurance. So if you're a doctor, you do something wrong, you have to have insurance to make sure you're safe from that. Now, same thing with these teachers. A lot of the parties said, well, these teachers will be trained, they'll know how to incapacitate, say, an aggressor or a student if something's going wrong. But what happens if they accidentally fire the gun to incapacitate the shooter and end up killing them? What kind of insurance are we going to have to be looking out for in order to make this plan work? Because I'm pretty sure that's going to have to be some pretty hefty insurance.
And Jacob, before we move on from that, you mentioned the success in Texas, and that seemed like a very inspiring story and good support. However, I was left wondering, is this really a causation? Is the security in Texas really just because teachers carry weapons? The evidence didn't say that. It simply correlated the fact that Texas has safe schools and their teachers carry weapons. Mm-hmm. But in my mind, the question still rings, is this the only reason? Is it a significant reason, or is there something else really that made this come to be how it is?
Yeah, I believe it was a select group of schools that this was happening, and it was specifically like a focus group of these couple schools, and from as far as they could tell, the threats the level went down, the amount of actual aggression attempts went down as well. So I think that would be pretty sound, but again, yeah, we never really know about the backing behind that.
So the point I had was when the audience came up and had the question that asked, I really liked the way that Maple and Elm Party answered the question about how the teachers are going to be trained to immobilize rather than to incapacitate. I did notice, however, that the Oak Party did kind of take their answers and incorporate it into their own. I'm not too sure if that was the actual answer, they just agreed, or it's just something to think about.
Mm-hmm. And Callahan as well said, not necessarily directly supporting this arming teachers bill, but they do support up-and-coming legislation. Now, I wasn't really sure what legislation they were talking about. I heard about some old legislation that had been passed that they were in support of, but had already been passed. I'd like to see which legislature specifically they're talking about, so that we can make like a more educated decision on who to vote for there.
I felt it was an interesting, basically discrepancy is how I see it, is when some of the parties felt very strongly when it came to the death penalty subject that we should not have the call on who lives, who dies, that is God's territory. However, some of those same parties came around and were in support of teachers carrying guns. And as it was answered that they may shoot not to kill, basically just to disable the attacker, there is still a pretty big chance that it could turn fatal. And at that point, it seems that the party first says that God should be the one that takes life, but on the other hand, it's also saying that, yes, it's okay to take someone's life in extreme measures. So how did you both feel that correlated?
Yeah, I thought it was like an interesting thing to point out. I mean, the fact that they are trying just to incapacitate things, like, you know, does give me a little bit more reassurance that, like, they stand behind their morals and everything. But I mean, you never can know, like, like, these are just teachers, you have to remember, not necessarily like troopers or anything, like, you know. So we have to make sure that, like, they are trained very well to use firearms. It's not like these teachers are going to be like firearm, like, nuts or anything, like, where they're going to want to go out and practice with these weapons. These were just arming teachers with the hope that if a problem comes, they'll be able to stop the aggressor by just incapacitating them, not like fatally injuring them or anything.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I think that I'd like to ask both of you, what was your favorite part of the evening, or something that you really enjoyed that the campaigns did tonight in their presentation of their candidates?
Well, I really enjoyed how everyone was different, but I think this year is going to be really hard because there's a lot of stuff to sort out. It's just all mixed together right now, and the voters are really going to have to try hard to figure out who they want to vote for this year.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts on that, well, my personal thoughts, I'm not saying this is like what everyone else thinks, but my personal thoughts on it are that the Elm and the Maple Party came out a little bit ahead of the rest. I feel that they did a really good job on presenting their candidate and everything that they stood for. But I do think that Willow came out a very, very close third, and Oak Party was right behind them.
Jacob, do you have any alignment of parties in your mind?
No, not right now.
I would tend to agree. I believe that Maple really did do a good job. Personally, I felt that Willow made a strong statement, which I believe was beneficial for them. They separated from the crowd a few different times, so I appreciated that. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out for them. But overall, I enjoyed the conciseness. I enjoyed the strong statements and just the full disclosure of where their candidates were. It didn't feel like anything was being hidden back tonight.
No, it didn't. It really didn't.
All right, well, with that, we will sign off for tonight's coverage of the gubernatorial debates. Have a nice night.